welcome all of you to tonight's event. My name is Dr. Laura Veau, and I'm a member of the Build the Era Advisory Board. I'm located in Newton, Massachusetts. Tonight, we are pleased to be hosting Greg Regan. He's the president of the Transportation Trades Department of the AFL-CIO. If you have never been to a Build the Era event, let me tell you a little bit about ourselves. Build the Era is committed to making the Department of Transportation's role in American movement understood by citizens and activating them to engage for smart and equitable investments by DOT for better multimodal planning in their communities. I'd like to thank you for being here and helping to contribute to the attainment of our mission, vision, and living our values. Tonight's event, the Transportation Trades Department of the AFL-CIO is the nation's largest transportation labor federation, representing 37 labor unions across all transportation industries, from rail and aviation to maritime and transit. TTD is proud to represent nearly 1 million transportation workers who build, operate, and maintain the nation's transportation and infrastructure systems. These union members will be very busy in years to come, thanks to the bipartisan infrastructure law, building and repairing bridges, expanding passenger rail service across the nation, safely getting the flying public where they need to go, and ensuring that our supply chain functions properly. Tonight, we are going to learn more about how these union members are essential to our transportation, trade, and security, and why we need to pay attention to this important aspect of our workforce. Our guest tonight is Greg Regan. He is the president of TTD. Greg is a board member of the Jobs to Move America Coalition and is also on the board of trustees of the Mineta Transportation Institute. Before joining TTD, Greg spent 6 years working for Congresswoman Louise Slaughter from New York, and he is originally from Rochester, New York. Greg is a Hamilton College graduate. He lives with his wife and dog in Washington, D.C., and is an avid golfer, hockey player, canner, woodworker, and supporter of mostly losing sports teams, which we need more information on which teams those might be. Being that he's from upstate New York, I have opinions. So, Greg, thank you for being here, and welcome to Build the Era.
Thank you. It's really nice to be here.
Before we get started, Greg, we have a little bit of information from your bio and your introduction, but tell us a little bit more about what brought you to transportation work, and specifically the work you do, and why you're so dedicated to it.
Sure. So I started my career on Capitol Hill, and early on, when I started taking on legislative work, I was given the labor portfolio, which I didn't know much about. I didn't come from a labor family. And very quickly, once I took it on, I decided that this is the most important economic policy issue that we could work on. I, in my view, thought right away, this is something that is the most important. This can address some of our equity issues, it can address our wage gap issues, it can address inequality in this country, and the growing disparity between the haves and have-nots. And so when I left Capitol Hill, I wanted to be in the labor movement. And when someone flagged the job at TTD for me, having never done transportation policy, I thought it wasn't a great fit. But then I realized that not only could I work on the most important economic issue, but I could do it in transportation, which affects every single American. So from that point, I was like, this is a match made in heaven. And I thought it might be a short stint, and now I've been here for 11 years, and one thing led to another, and I got elected president.
There you go. Well, congratulations, President Regan. That's awesome. And we will talk about your losing sports teams later. Okay. So, and being that I grew up in New York, I know a lot about losing sports teams. Okay. So, Greg, for ease of organization, we're going to frame the conversation tonight about 3 primary transportation areas: rail, air, and maritime. We're going to talk about several priority topics within these areas, and I'm really looking forward to a free-flowing conversation, as we typically do here with our events for Build the Era. I want to start with rail because of a variety of reasons, but most notably what we're seeing right now in East Palestine. This was a terrible derailment in East Palestine, Ohio, and it's been the focus of several organizations, including TTD, the US DOT, the NTSB, which got a preliminary finding today. They had a press conference about that, and obviously the EPA, as well as news media. We know that while the NTSB has given a preliminary update today, the investigation is ongoing. It may take up to 18 months to finalize the investigation. And while the US DOT can take preliminary steps in advance of the final investigation, it is important to know that the investigation is ongoing. We know that there are thousands of derailments annually on our rail system. For instance, for the first half of 2020, under the Trump administration, between January 1st and May 31st, 2020, there were 4,365 derailments. While the vast majority are not to the scale of East Palestine, any single derailment could cause loss of life, further environmental damage, forest fires, whatever it might be. There's all kinds of things that could happen for this. It's for this reason that that action must be taken by Congress. And later tonight, we from Build the Era are going to provide details on a call to action that we are launching tomorrow. So please, for everyone who is watching this now live or watching it on YouTube later, there will be more information on our call to action later on tonight, as well as links in our YouTube posting. In a nutshell, the US DOT needs Congress to act in order to enact and enforce rail safety measures and hold railroads accountable. And companies like Norfolk Southern need to be held properly accountable. President Regan, Greg, I'd love your comments on how this event puts a new lens on the importance of rail safety for workers and the rail community, and how you're feeling about things right now.
So, one thing is, from a worker's perspective, I'm not sure it puts a new focus on rail safety. We've been raising the alarm about a degrading safety culture in the railroad industry for years now. And, we point to specifically the precision scheduled railroading, the dramatic cuts in workforce and in infrastructure, the focus on profits over delivering both economically, but also delivering safely. The difference this time is now other people are starting to pay attention. It's gotten the attention of the country. And I hope that we can use this opportunity to make some really meaningful changes and reforms to the industry so that we're going to see a safer system overall. I mean, to your point, we've had, thousands of derailments a year, thousands. And since the East Palestine derailment, we've had 4 in other parts of the country, including another one involving hazardous materials. So this is a problem. It just so happened that the wrong cars derailed at the wrong time in the wrong place in East Palestine to create this crisis that we had. So while we don't know what happened, what specifically caused this accident, we do know, based on our lived experience, the workers' experience, where there are problems in safety overall. And that's where we're going to be looking to try to make major reforms moving forward here.
I'm really glad you brought that up about what we know and what you've been advocating for in the past. And I really think it's essential for people to be aware that there were 3 personnel on the train that derailed in East Palestine. And I know that TTD, Secretary Pete, and others have been critical of the railroad industry and their desire to reduce staffing. And talk to us more about that, because it was shocking to me. First of all, when I'm driving a 16-passenger van, I want to have 2 other people to make sure I can see outside of different angles, so I'm not, knocking someone's side view mirror off. Okay, so I can't even imagine what it's like to drive a train of that size with that kind of responsibility with 3 people forget on my own, which is what the railroad industry is pushing for. Can you talk to us about how TTD has gotten out in front of this, how they're trying to articulate this issue, how they're trying to push for this kind of safety measure, and what is it that we need to know as, we're consumers. We are not all people who have an experience in this field. We are consumers of the transportation industry. What do we need to know about this push to keep our trains properly staffed?
Well, the first thing you need to know is that the only reason why we still have 2 people on every single freight train is because of the unions. We have kept that in the course of collective bargaining. It's not, that wouldn't be our choice. We wouldn't want that to be the way, because frankly, we believe it to be a core safety issue. So we've attacked this in 2 different ways. One, there's legislation introduced every Congress to try to mandate and put that into statute that we will have at least 2 crew members on every single train. Absent that, there is a rulemaking process going right now. And hopefully that will be finalized very soon. That is a safety rulemaking, so that will ensure, at least until another administration decides to repeal it, that we will have 2 people on every freight train. That was the first time this rule was proposed was in 2015. That was ultimately repealed by the next administration. And now we're back moving in that direction. And I think it's really important that, because this is an FRA regulation, it means that this is a safety regulation, which is, at the bottom line, that's what it's about. It's about safety. It's about making sure that that we can operate these trains in the most efficient and safest way. And if you look at what happened with East Palestine, the way that those 2 and 3, because one was a trainee, were able to cooperate and to decouple the trains that were still on the track to remove any possible further cars from catching on fire or exploding. They work in tandem to react in that situation and to make sure that they can respond in the right way.
I think one of the things that's quite stunning to me about this is that all of a sudden, and good or bad, I mean, I think that's one of the things that happens when there's an event like this, is that the world kind of turns its attention to it and says coulda, shoulda, woulda. And if they haven't been part of these conversations over the amount of time that you have, and I know there's probably people at TTD and in the unions who've been part of these conversations even longer, and there's a lot of regulations, there's a lot of numbers, there's a lot of nomenclature that the regular person may not be aware of. But that ultimately, I think one of the things that you've just stressed is that the unions have been pushing for what should be almost human values for quite some time. But what happens is, in the boardrooms at the executive suite level, this is where decisions get made about some of the things that actually can have a long-term impact on the safety, quality of life, and security of the folks doing the work. Is that about right?
Yeah, and I think, one thing to keep in mind, and why we always view it that it's so important to have strong regulations from the federal government, is having experienced the bargaining process, most recently, just last year, very acutely. But having experienced that, I mean, everything is assigned a financial value. So that's the view through which the railroads are looking at every single issue, is through whether it's a cost of a certain amount versus a benefit. So they are looking at everything through the lens of how much does it cost and how much will this can impact our profits? How much will this impact our ability to make more money? So that's why it is imperative for the federal government to have a strong FRA to be able to make the regulations that take those things off the table. So it's no longer about dollars and cents. It's strictly about safe operations.
Great point. So keeping with labor issues, we're all aware of the action taken in November of this past year by Congress to avoid a rail strike, which would have had a pretty crippling impact on our supply chain. TTD member unions were at the table for these negotiations, and for the casual observer who tried to oversimplify this matter, can you give us updates as to where we are with this particular matter and what are the next steps?
Yeah, look, I think that it's always a shame if the vote to impose a contract is taken away from the members. That is never a result that anybody wants. At the end of the day, I do think there was mostly a lot of focus on the sick leave issue and the quality of life issues. I do think that some of the stuff that got lost was a lot of the gains that we made that the unions negotiated in that contract. The highest wage increase in 45 years, $5,000 bonus for every employee, status quo on healthcare, which is good. That was what we wanted. So there are a lot of really good things there. But I think the issues that we're focused on, these quality of life issues, all go back to the really dramatic furloughs and job cuts that we've seen over the past decade or so. So, just for example, the railroads across the big four railroads have cut 30%, 45,000 employees during since 2015. And the practical impact of that is that they're requiring the workers who are still there to essentially be on call all the time. Right. So that's why sick leave became an issue, because they didn't have access to their existing leave to do things like preventative health care, to take care of a sick loved one, things like that. And the attendance policies that were designed to be punitive enough to essentially make it painful for someone to take time off were even more dramatically affected, the work-life balance for some of these people. So I'm glad that the reaction from the broader public and from the media really did focus on those issues, because I think it's too often that you see, when there's a labor dispute, you see the media or others say, oh, those greedy people, I could do that job. They don't deserve that much. And in this case, they were like, I can't believe, really? Those workers don't have sick leave? And I think there was a general outrage over that. So I'm excited for the fact that we have momentum about sort of general fairness of the workplace. I'm happy to see that I think a lot of this public pressure and aggressive action by the unions has dragged a lot of the railroads to the table. We've seen, for example, CSX reach agreements with several unions about a sick leave agreement. We've seen the same thing with UP, I think just announced one this week. So I think we're going to get there. But we wouldn't have gotten there if it weren't for sort of the acute attention to this issue that happened towards the end of the bargaining process.
So one of the things that I think is interesting about this is that for people who are literally have the attention span of a fly, and they only heard this and now it's over, and people they don't realize that these kind of progress has happened maybe rail company by rail company. What's the responsibility here of making sure people know that here's where we're at? These companies have done the work. These companies are still pushing back. Do you do that? Does TTD do that? Do the unions do that? How does that actually come out in the world, so that people know that, by the way, your outrage actually helped to kind of fuel some of the momentum here? And the good news is it's happening, but it's happening in a way that you may not be used to.
Yeah, and we certainly, and our unions are certainly touting this when we reach these agreements, and we want to move forward with, we want to actually, and part of this is when we get an agreement, it helps put pressure on the other railroads that haven't gotten there. So we want people to know that, because we want, the other ones to feel shame, I guess, if you'd like to use that, that they haven't done it yet.
It's an old slap shot reference.
Exactly.
You feel shame. Okay.
Yep. And so I think that there is an important role that we can play here. I think, to be honest with you, the federal government, this administration has also been paying really close attention and continued to be engaged on the issue. And they are, every time there is a new agreement, I get a call of congratulations from whether it be Secretary Buttigieg or the Deputy Secretary Polly Trottenberg, somebody else, just how happy that this is moving in the right direction. And the other thing that I find interesting here, I can't remember a sequence like this where freight rail has been so in the headlines. This has always been an industry where people seem to forget how vital it is to the economy in this country. It's sort of the sleeping giant in this economy. And so people don't pay attention unless there's a potential economic catastrophe out of a work stoppage, or if there's a major disaster. And usually that involves fatalities. Fortunately, there were not fatalities here. So we have a high-profile accident, a catastrophe that showed real risk that happens in the industry if it's not done right. We have examples of work-life balance issues, and sick leave, access to sick leave is important for making sure that people are going to work healthy and not fatigued, so that they're able to do their jobs to the best of their ability. And that's a safety issue. So now we have an opportunity where fortunately nobody passed away. There is a lot of attention on the issue. And, generally when that happens, we can drive some real important changes in the industry.
It's my understanding that the rail unions recently attended a meeting with Senator Sanders from Vermont. Is there something from that conversation that you think is important for us to know about as we are looking at this issue as it expands?
The most important takeaway you can get from that meeting and from other meetings like it, frankly, is that the important people in government are not forgetting. This is not an issue that people, well, we got through that round of bargaining and now we'll just sort of forget about it and move on to the next thing. And that was the whole point of the press conference that I was part of with Senator Sanders, which is to remind the railroads that we haven't forgotten about this. And, there will be legislation introduced. There will be other efforts to remind them that if you don't do the right thing, there are other people who are going to try to force this issue, whether in any way they can. So that's been a really heartening thing from our perspective, that this isn't one of those, you mentioned short-term memory earlier, the people that sort of just, have the memory of a goldfish, but
Yeah.
that is especially true on Capitol Hill. They're very good at moving from one potential issue to the next. And in this case, the fact that, we made such an impression on elected leaders that we finally got through to what these workers are facing. And I think they're going to stick with us until we deliver on, better results.
That's great. Important to note. One more thing about rail safety, I want to switch to passenger rail, specifically when it comes to public transit. There's different safety issues on public transit that people may not be aware of that TTD is working on, specifically transit workers who are attacked by passengers. When I was prepping for this with your staff, I was absolutely shocked to find out that in some communities, TTD is getting transit worker protection put into the infrastructure law, because in some communities, they've had to have police officers at the location where the kind of the shift in staff happens, because that's a place that is a risk where a transit worker might come off of the train, they might get attacked, something like that, and they've had to make sure that there's police officers there. I was really struck by the fact that TTD worked so closely on getting transit worker protections into the infrastructure law. That's hugely important, but I don't think it's on people's radar. What do you think are some of the most pressing issues related to safety on the rails, both for passenger rail and for transit? And what's TTD trying to get out to the public on this?
Well, unfortunately, this was true before the pandemic, and it's even more true now, is the number of assaults on transit workers has just been increasing dramatically. And we've seen some really pretty gruesome examples here. And I don't know that I should share them all here, but that we've had bus drivers die due to incidents. We've had people get hit with tree branches. We've had all sorts of really awful stuff happen. And guess what? If you're going to have, there's a couple fallouts from this. One, we have a looming crisis in terms of the transit workforce. We need to recruit more people in the industry. And if the advertisement you're seeing for these jobs are another local news clip about a bus driver getting beat up, it's probably not a very good advertisement to recruit people into your industry. The other aspect is we need to recruit people back to public transit after the pandemic. And again, violence in any form is not a very good recruitment tool to ensure people that they're going to be able to use public transit and use it safely. So I think this is a pressing issue that the transit agencies all across the country, large and small, need to be taking seriously. So what we did accomplish in the infrastructure law was, in my view, the first step for how do we solve this problem. It's almost diagnostic in a way. So in part, it's about better defining what an assault is, because under the previous law or standards, you could get second-degree burns, and that wouldn't count as an assault, whether it be coffee. You could have a broken nose or broken fingers. That would not count as an assault. So we're better clarifying the scope of the problem in that way. The other important reform that we got done is to ensure that there are union representatives on each agency's public safety committee or safety planning committee. And this is one of those that I cannot believe we get fought on, because, our workers, our members are the ones who have the eyes and ears on the ground. They're the ones who see the vulnerabilities. They see where the threats are. They know what they've experienced. Why wouldn't you want their voice when you're trying to plan for a safer transit system? So now there are requirements that every transit agency will have these, and there are going to be financial consequences if they don't get these safety planning committees up and running and have union voices there. And in both of those cases, that is setting the stage, because once we have a better conversation and better information, then we can start looking at what different solutions to all of this. We can't create regulations on the American psyche and try to understand why people have suddenly become violent. But what we can do is try to mitigate risks to both passengers and workers. So whether it's better, barriers between the operators and the trains, whether there's different cameras that can be done, maybe there are other signage that you can post to sort of scare people who might be inclined to do something. I don't know what all of the solutions are going to be. We've seen some effectiveness in things like barriers, but we need to have the information to be able to do this in the best way.
It's my understanding that these public safety committees are really about what's appropriate for specific communities. So a public safety committee for New York City versus Rochester, New York are going to be two very different kind of makeups. And are those things that the public can actually take part in? Or, one of the things that we try here with Build the Era is to get people to pay attention in ways and take action in ways that they can actually do locally. Is this something that they can do locally, or what are some of the local opportunities for a person, a lay person, a consumer of transit, be able to actually get out there and be able to support the transit workers and support that transit system?
I think it depends on how it's set up in every individual agency, but your local government is going to be involved in this, whether it's the city council, whether it's the town commission, things like that. Those are going to be involved. So just like anything in government, you have to participate at the level who are there making decisions, and certainly on a local level, this is one opportunity to do that.
Awesome. I want to shift our attention to commercial aviation. There's the FAA reauthorization bill specifically. TTD is in support of the bill, which has a September 2023 deadline. Can you tell us more about what's at stake in the bill? It's my understanding that it involves labor, including pilots and FAA staff. These are essential for the airlines to keep passenger flights running. We're hearing from airline CEOs that the industry is strained and isn't getting any better. Interestingly, what you just said about local transit goes, you're not recruiting people to become flight attendants or working in an airline if there's people attacking them on a plane. So are there strains related to the reauthorization bill, directly or indirectly, that actually have to do with some of the things the CEOs are trying to bring up? Where is this all at, and what's TTD trying to do to support the reauthorization bill?
Yes, there are definitely labor force problems in the industry. Where we are going to be very active is to not allow the corporate side to actually take apply the wrong solutions to that. So one of these is in pilot supply, and I don't use the term pilot shortage. It's pilot supply. We are certifying, and this is FAA data that shows this, we are certifying more US trained pilots than there are jobs that are on the open market. The problem is, especially for some of the regional carriers, these are very, very difficult jobs in terms of very low pay, worse benefits. I mean, there is the promise that as you work your way up, they can be very, very good jobs. But it's difficult to keep people in the system if they're going to suffer through years of extremely low pay and very difficult scheduling and lack of priority and all that stuff. So we need to fix the pilot pay issue. That is, the pilot pay shortage is the main cause of concern there. If you're looking at staffing in other areas, whether it be in flight attendants or ramp workers or customer service agents or any of the above, I think we have to go back to what happened with the pandemic. We had a pretty revolutionary law in the CARES Act that was driven by labor. We were the ones pushing this solution, knowing that passengers were going to drop by 90 to 95%, that there needed to be some sort of government aid to the industry. And this was true in transit, and it was true in passenger rail as well. But what Congress did with our insistence was to ensure that every bit of aid money went directly to pay and benefits of the workers. So the people, so that was important for two reasons. One, it meant that the airlines couldn't just lay a bunch of people off pocket money and then start over. And two, it meant that when we were back to being able to travel, we would have the workforce in place, and these are highly trained people in every level, the workforce in place to get ready to reboot. Unfortunately, so we ended up paying the salary and benefits for every airline for about 2 years. And I think they got used to that. And of course, during that 2-year time, there was natural attrition in the industry, whether people decided they wanted to do something different or they retired, whatever it may be, there was a drop in the workforce across the aviation industry. And when it became clear that we were about to get ramped up and we we're going to see a lot more demand for flights, the airlines were slow to respond to that. I don't think they aggressively hired the way they needed to and try to build the workforce in anticipation of that. And we're still seeing a lot of those consequences right now. And then, of course, if you're looking at the private sector or the public sector side with air traffic controllers and safety inspectors and technicians, this bill is what ensures that we have the facilities and the schools ready to bring people through the pipeline and do that long training process to ensure that we have the workforce needed to manage the largest aviation system, national airspace system in the world and the busiest one in the world. So this bill really helps with all of that stuff. And I'll just go back really quickly on pilot. I mean, one of the things that people try to point to, that there are some in the industry who try to say, well, it's these pilot training rules, those are the problems. It's that other issue. That's, we can do more simulation training. We can do all this other stuff. If the solution is going to be roll back safety rules that have proven to be effective, then that is the wrong solution. We have to go back to the drawing board. And, some of these rules are barely 12, 13 years old, maybe barely a decade old. And in that decade, we have had the safest period in the history of US aviation. Why we would want to back away from any of those is just confounding to me. I do not understand why that is, why that would be an attractive solution to any lawmaker or any regulator. So that is going to be a major priority of ours, is to make sure that we can't use this quote unquote pilot shortage as an excuse to roll back safety.
The safety is a theme that we have throughout tonight's chat. It was not necessarily by design, but it is. Okay, it's a reality, is that there are people who keep the trains running on time, who keep the airlines running safely, all those kinds of things. And we need to make sure that safety is an incredibly important aspect of how we engage as consumers with each of these modes of transit. And realize that safety of ourselves, as well as the safety of the people who are doing the work, is of utmost importance. And I'm glad to hear that TTD puts safety up front and is absolutely an important aspect of the work you do. I want to switch gears to maritime, and I know it sounds like I'm giving air traffic or commercial air aviation a short shrift, but we don't spend enough time talking about maritime, and I'm on the microphone, so we're going to talk about maritime. Okay. We have a national maritime shortage in terms of staff. I mean, again, going to this idea of not having enough people to do some of the most important work. And we need to have more people to be part of our maritime program. It's my understanding that there's a requirement that U.S. personnel are part of the maritime program, especially around building of ships. Am I wrong here when it comes to like federal ships? Am I wrong?
No, the Jones Act requires that any ship that goes in between U.S. ports, so if it sails directly from one port to another, the ship must be U.S. crewed, U.S. built, and U.S. flagged.
And so, I live in Massachusetts. Mass Maritime is our way to get folks trained and educated in that area. I have a girlfriend of mine actually whose son just graduated from Mass Maritime this past spring. And she's absolutely shocked by how many opportunities he has for jobs. Like literally just every time he turns on his email, he gets another offer like, hey, have you thought about this? and how much money the kid's making fresh out of college. So she's like, I was worried, and now I'm not worried anymore. So that's my little pitch for Mass Maritime. But there's a maritime shortage, and this has a direct impact on supply chains. There's a limited number of shipping companies, and can you talk a little bit about how this shipping companies and how that has an impact on our supply chain, and how can bringing more trained workers into the maritime industry help? And what are the benefits of this type of work as far as your unions are concerned?
Sure. Well, I think that honestly, we need a national maritime strategy as a country right now. I think that is something we're missing. And the supply chain crisis that we had in 2021, that highlighted how important this is and why it's important for us to think about these things. We have most of U.S. shipping is controlled by about 4 major conglomerate companies, foreign companies, all less than 2% of all goods that go in and out of U.S. ports are shipped on U.S. flag vessels with U.S. crews. So when we're talking about major trade, whether it's U.S. exports or we're bringing in the supplies we need to manufacture what we need, we are completely at the mercy of these big foreign countries who are going to, believe it or not, they're not going to prioritize us. So we do have a few laws that have kept our maritime or U.S. flagged fleet where it is, which is not very big, but it does have some impact there, and it's creating the great opportunities that your friend's son has. But we need to better enforce them and expand them if we're going to be looking at how do we create a U.S. sea lift capacity that can actually be, it can make us more competitive. It can be a redundancy to ensure that we are not subject to the whims of another foreign conglomerate. And also it can help service some of these emerging industries that we're seeing, especially with some of the new investment we have on green energy. There's a lot of focus on things like offshore wind. And there is focus on U.S. labor that's being done to build and operate those systems. But there's also a lot of need from a maritime capacity there. So if we use these opportunities where there is a lot of federal investment going into an industry like offshore wind, but also ensure there's policy in there so that we're going to have, certain requirements or goals to have U.S. flag vessels delivering supplies and delivering workers to those sites. Not only are we actually maximizing the economic benefit of that investment because we're providing more jobs and creating more economic activity, but we're also helping to rebuild that capacity that we have basically given away in the last 40 or 50 years. So that is an important part. But there's also things like, we have cargo preference laws. So the U.S. government is paying to ship, food aid to another country, or if we're paying to move anything in the federal government on ship, I think in some cases 75%, in other cases 60% or 50% must be done on a U.S. flag vessel. Why aren't we making that 100%? We're paying that money. Let's make sure that the benefits are going to accrue not only to the people who are receiving the aid or whatever it is we're sending, but also making sure that we are strengthening a core industry in this country, and one that was just proven to be so vital when we were having these massive shortages of shipping options.
Right. And, to the flashback to what we said earlier about people's memories, it's as if they're like, oh yeah, it's all fixed now. And it's like, did you know that there's only 5 companies and none of them are US companies? And what if they just decide they don't want to play anymore? What are we going to do?
Well, and by the way, to that point, I've talked to several of my maritime labor friends who, I've made the point, well, we no longer have 60 ships circling or anchored off the coast of LA Long Beach, the port of LA Long Beach anymore. And they'll say yeah, it's true, but that's because they don't like that imagery. They're all just circling 60 yards or 60 miles offshore. We haven't fundamentally solved the problem yet.
No, we've moved the lanes. We haven't solved the problem.
Yes.
And it's super important that we keep that in mind. I also want to talk a little bit about the building of the ships. And there's unions that are part of TTD that are part of our shipbuilding industry. What does that look like? It goes to your point about we don't have a maritime strategy. We have to have these ships built. but what kind of opportunities are out there right now, and where do those jobs actually live?
Well, there's a lot shipbuilding jobs sort of down on the Gulf Coast and other areas like that, but most of it is military shipbuilding. In terms of commercial shipbuilding, we don't have a lot left. We just actually last summer I was in Cleveland for the for a ship christening for the first U.S. built Jones Act compliant vessel for Great Lakes transportation, the first one in 40 years to be built. And that was the first ship. And it was neat to be there, but it was also alarming that it's been 40 years since we built a new ship to do, to transport things like grain and salt with our largest trading partner in Canada. That's a problem. But there are other things we can do, creating a marine highway system, for example. When we have major backups at LA Long Beach, which is the busiest port in the country, but we have sort of a double taxation issue on the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund, which if you bring in a major ship from off seas, you can unload some cargo in LA Long Beach, pay the harbor maintenance tax there. And if you want to take a smaller vessel and perhaps bring it up to Seattle or bring it up to even Oakland or Portland, you would have to pay a double tax on that cargo. So it's a disincentive to make sure that you're basically just going to focus on one port. And we create that as a viable option to reduce congestion on the railroads or on the road. That might incentivize more people to invest in domestic shipbuilding so they can take advantage of that. It creates more opportunities for jobs where you can help bring more people into the industry. So, these are the types of policies that I think our country has just sort of ignored for too long.
Is there someone, on Capitol Hill who's kind of your maritime go-to person, or are there people who are paying attention to this that are elected officials, or is this something flying under the radar?
There are definitely people who are paying attention. John Garamendi from California is a member who has always been focused on maritime and maritime labor. Certainly, if you have members from LA Long Beach area and also a lot from Seattle, from the Washington area. So, Senators Cantwell and Murray are also engaged on these issues. But and then you've got some surprising people who actually care about maritime issues, which a lot of times some people that are not usually big fans of labor in the southeastern United States, especially on the Gulf Coast, who are actually really eager to work with us on some of these issues.
Great. I'm going to ask you one question that I think is maybe a little outside of the TTD specifically working with the unions, but I wonder how much you get involved in any of this. As we think about back to the beginning when we were talking about East Palestine, the NTSB is, it's going to take 18 months on this investigation, but they do investigations on all kinds of things. And it's my understanding that the NTSB is woefully understaffed. And when the NTSB is understaffed, that means these investigations take a really long time. And the end result in terms of hopefully making our rails, our airlines, and our maritime ways safer takes time, and it's exhausting. Is there anything that TTD gets involved in terms of saying, hey, we advocate for more money to go towards these agencies to make sure that they are properly staffed with the right humans who are experts in this work?
Yes, we would absolutely get involved in those types of issues, and especially if if my friend Jennifer Hamady, the chair of the NTSB, came and said,
"She's a badass." I'm just going to tell you,
she's incredible.
She's unbelievable.
She also, by the way, although we didn't overlap, she worked at TTD at one point.
Yes.
A while ago, so she has some labor roots as well. And she's also yelled at me before, but she was very nice about it afterwards.
Based on the I apologize for interrupting, but based on the press conference today, she interrupts. She yells at people.
Oh yeah. Well,
she was yelling at the press. I'm like, I could watch this woman all day. But go ahead.
Yeah. No, she speaks her mind, and you know what? If she yells at you, you usually walk away and be like, dang, she was right.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, Jennifer came to us and said, we need you all to support this funding level. Here's what it goes towards. We would do that in a heartbeat. We know how vital the work they do is towards, in the accident response, but also like what they come up with and their recommendations are really important tools towards advancing safety. And I know we've had a lot of focus on safety in this conversation. But in reality, that's probably 60-70% of what we work on. We don't, especially in our organization, we're not working on, what things would sort of pigeonhole as labor issues a lot of the time. I mean, we're working on things like bleed air and cabin air quality for aircraft cabins. We're working on things like automatic track inspection and brake inspection on the railroads. We're working on assault prevention issues in every one of our modes. That's why we've always sort of joked, but it's true that the Department of Transportation is our Department of Labor. That's where most of the things that our member unions care about are ultimately going to be discussed or regulated in and talked about. That's in their jurisdiction. So that's going to be the biggest focus on the FAA reauthorization. It's going to be our biggest focus right now on railroads. And again, we tie all of the quality of life issues and those issues back to safety as well. So it is. I really I don't know that I can. Maybe this is patting ourselves on the back too much, but most of the major safety regulations that you see. And most of the advancements that we've seen recently are because labor is pushing for them. I assure you that our employers are not voluntarily asking to be regulated. We are the ones pushing for it because we are the members on the ground who see the risks, who live those lives, and they're the ones telling us we need to make change here.
Fantastic. So I'm going to bump it over to Jonathan French, one of our Build the Era advisory board members, and we're going to talk about a call to action. And then after that, Greg, I'm going to ask you to just give us a little bit of a send off and tell us a little bit about the Mineta Transportation Institute and what the work of that institute is. And then we'll wrap up for today. But Jonathan, tell us about the call to action that we are going to be launching immediately after this event.
Yes, thank you, Laura. And thank you, Greg, for being with us today and great information. So Build the Era, we've been following this derailment, and we decided that we do need to put together some sort of action because people really need some sort of direction. A lot of people are putting responsibility on the USDOT and Secretary Buttigieg, but not a lot of people were holding Congress responsible. And we know, that ultimately Congress is the one that gives USDOT the authority to protect rail workers and railroad communities. And it's really actions in Congress that need to happen first. While, rulemaking is a possibility, Congress can do something very quickly and have something, go into effect. And really what happened in East Palestine was a warning. There's a cleanup happening there, but I think we all remember back when, and certainly I do, being from Maine, is when Lac Mégantic, Quebec in 2013, when that train was out of control and carried crude oil, essentially a bomb went off in the middle of the town and incinerated it. And 47 people were killed. And, we obviously do not want to see that happen in the United States or anywhere, really. In order to do something about that, we need congressional action. Secretary Buttigieg, it was an interesting Twitter conversation, as many things happen nowadays. But there was a dialogue between Representative Omar, I believe, and Senator Ted Cruz, both sort of in agreement. And Secretary Buttigieg said, all you need to do is give USDOT a call and we can have a good conversation, and do some good work to address rail safety and reduce constraints on the department. And we know Congress is divided, but if we can get some agreement here, we can get something done. And Build the Era has come up with this action. We created a letter that you can just type in your information, your address, and it'll automatically bring up your congressional delegation members. And then you can send them a letter that gives 2 asks. The first one is to call Secretary Buttigieg immediately and work with him and the experts at USDOT on first steps making rail workers and railroad communities safe. And that includes streamlining federal safety rule processes that are being causing rules to be implemented very slowly. And then most importantly, working across the aisle with members of Congress to get something done, to get something to President Biden that will prioritize safety in these railroad communities. So again, we're going to be releasing this after this event here, but it's pretty simple. You just have to fill in your information and select a couple of things, and then you can send a letter to your entire congressional delegation to promote railroad safety and for the workers and for the communities that all these railroads go through.
Thank you, Jonathan. And so you will all receive more information on this, making sure that you get the information on how to take action. As Jonathan said, it is very easy to do, and it allows for us to send off letters to all of our elected officials based on you don't even have to look them up. They know where they are, they know who you have based on your address and your zip code. So it goes immediately and quickly. And if you're wondering how else you can help us, is once you do it, you can then share your action and post it on social media and share with your friends and family. And the more people we can get on this, the better. As my father would say, we need the people on Capitol Hill to blank or get off the pot. So that means actually just do the work and get the work done. And so this will give you an opportunity to do that and encourage people to stop flapping their gums and start doing the work. So Greg, our last moments together, would love to hear you tell us a little bit more about the Mineta Transportation Institute, and then we'll send folks on their way.
Okay, great. So the Mineta Institute is it's based out of San Jose State University. It is a educational transportation centric research institute. They do have students that go through their program. They have graduations, and I've met a number of the alumnus who have gone on to great careers in transit agencies or in transportation otherwise. But they also do a lot of research on transportation. And one of the values that we get out of being on the board there is, we can help shape sort of what they're going to be looking at. So we've talked to them a lot about, the public safety issues, whether it be, assaults on board bus drivers. That's something that they're doing a very deep dive on right now. And if you look at their, their website now, they're talking about things like human trafficking. How do we address human trafficking in transportation? They have a lot of really interesting topics, and the other people in the trustees on for the institute are, from a wide sort of diverse group of transportation experts, whether they be from the agency side, the corporate side, the labor side. So it's always an interesting discussion, and one that helps, sort of really drive the conversation when they release some of their research products.
That's great. So that's very interesting. And so thank you so much. And if you want to learn more about the transportation trades department of the AFL-CIO, you can go to their website at ttd.org. It also has all of their social links, including Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. And Greg, we really appreciate your time. We know that everybody really appreciates you being here. And we hope that you keep us in your sights in the future. So.
Of course. No, it was fun. Thanks for doing it.
Thank you so much, Greg. And thank you, everybody, and have a pleasant evening, and see you next time.